The wind took the words out of her mouth before he could hear them, but he saw her lips move, and he saw the bundle she pressed against her chest, and Cass Holloway swung down from the saddle before he had decided to. The wagon lay on its side in the drift, one wheel still turning in slow surrender. A dead horse in the traces, a woman on her knees in the snow, holding something small and still. "Ma'am!" She looked up. Her mouth was cracked at the corners. Her eyes were the pale winter blue of ice under a running creek. "Ma'am, we've got to move. There's a homestead 2 miles east. I can ride for." She caught the sleeve of his coat with a strength he did not expect. The bundle in her other arm shifted, and a thin cry came out of it, and she pulled him closer with a hand that would not let go. "My baby will die if you leave us." Her voice cracked on the word die. "Please, my baby will die if you leave us." Cass Holloway had been a widower for 4 winters. He had ridden home through a great many storms and a great many moods, and he had learned to answer the world with as few words as it required. He said nothing now. He knelt in the snow, unwrapped the edge of the shawl to see the small red face inside it, and covered it again. Then he lifted the woman to her feet. The ride back to the Holloway place was 3 miles into a wind that took the breath out of a man and gave nothing in return. Cass held the reins in his right hand and the woman and the child in the crook of his left arm. Tucked inside the great sheepskin coat his brother had sent him from Montana the year before he died. He could feel the child's cry through 2 layers of wool. He could feel the woman shivering against his ribs. Neither of these things had happened to him in a long time, and he did not think about them. The barn showed first, a darker gray inside the gray. Then the house, low and long, with one window lit yellow behind an oilcloth. He rode straight up to the porch and lowered them down and led the horse into the barn and unsaddled it with hands that did not want to bend, and then he came back across the yard with the woman leaning on his arm. The door opened before he reached it. Nora stood in the doorway with a lamp held above her head. She was 6 years old and small for 6, and she wore her mother's old wool shawl wrapped twice around her shoulders because she would not sleep without it. She looked at her father, and then she looked at the woman, and then she looked at the bundle in the woman's arms, and her face did a thing Cass had not seen it do since the second winter after her mother. "Papa, bring her in." He brought her in. He set the woman by the fire and took the bundle out of her arms only because her arms would not open on their own. Nora had already pushed the kettle onto the coals. Nora had already dragged the good quilt off the settle. Nora, who spoke to strangers exactly never, walked to the woman without hesitation and put a small palm on her knee. "You're cold." The woman looked down at the child. Whatever she had been holding back at the wagon came loose in her then, quietly, and she began to weep without any sound at all. Nora kept her hand where it was. "I have a baby." The woman's voice was thin. "I have a baby, and he's on the table." Nora did not take her hand from Ellen's knee. Papa put him on the table by the fire. "He's alive. I can see him breathing." Cass had put the child on the table without knowing what else to do. He was unwrapping the outer shawl one careful layer at a time. The infant inside was perhaps 4 months old. Its face was raw with cold, and its cry had gone thin, but it was breathing. And when Cass slid a knuckle against its cheek, it turned toward him with the stubborn instinct of the very young. "Boy," he said the word to no one in particular. "His name is Samuel." The woman wiped her face with the heel of her hand. My name is Ellen Reed. I was going to my brother in Bishop's Ford. He wrote he had work." Cass did not answer that. He handed the child, rewrapped, to Nora, because Nora was already holding out her arms. Nora sat down in the rocker with the baby against her collarbone the way she had once seen a woman do at the mercantile, and she began to rock, very slowly, with an expression of terrible seriousness. Cass watched his daughter for a moment. Then he went to warm broth. Ellen Reed, when the shivering finally stopped, told him the rest of it in short, flat sentences. Her husband had died in September. The farm had gone to his cousin, who had a wife of his own and no room. Her brother in Bishop's Ford had answered her letter with a page and a half of qualifications. She had spent the last of the money on the wagon and the horse. The horse had gone lame 2 days out, and then died in the traces when the storm came down. Bishop's Ford is 40 miles. Cass did not look up from the broth. I know. In this, it's 100. I know. He did not say anything about what she should have done differently. He had lived long enough to know that a person in her situation had already said all of that to herself, at length, in the dark. You'll stay till the storm clears. He did not look at her while he spoke. There's the small room at the back. It was my sister's. Thank you. Nora will help you with the boy. Thank you. Nora, in the rocker, did not look up. She was watching Samuel's face with the concentration of a woman reading a will. The storm did not clear. It went on for 4 days, and then it paused for a morning of hard blue cold, and then it came back for 3 more. Cass fed the stock in the pauses and mended tack in the long hours between, and Ellen learned the small rhythms of the house without being told them. She rose before he did. She had the fire built up and the coffee on by the time he came in from the barn. She washed Nora's face with a warm cloth in the mornings, and she plaited her hair without pulling. And Nora, who had endured her father's clumsy braiding for 4 winters with the stoic patience of a much older woman, accepted this as her due. On the second day, Ellen found the mending basket. It had been Cass's wife's. It had sat on the shelf by the window for 4 years, and Cass had not opened it because he did not know what to do with the things inside it, and he did not know how to throw them away. Ellen opened it. She did not ask permission, and she did not make a ceremony of it. She took out a shirt of Cass's with a torn cuff, and she sat down by the fire and she mended it, and when she was done she folded it and set it on the settle and took out the next thing. By the 4th day the basket was empty. By the 5th day Nora had begun to bring her things. She brought her doll first, which had lost an arm 2 summers ago and had gone about one-armed ever since because Cass had tried once to sew it back on and had made the seam so lumpy that Nora had cried. Ellen took the doll and the arm and disappeared with them into the back room and came back after supper with the doll whole and the seam invisible. Nora accepted the doll without a word. She took it to bed with her, and she did not put it down for 2 days. She brought her mother's shawl next. This was the harder thing. The shawl was gray wool with a border of small blue flowers stitched by a hand Nora could not remember. It was thinning at one edge, and it had begun to unravel where she gripped it in her sleep. Nora carried it to Ellen in both hands, the way a much older person carries a bird. Can you make it not come apart? Ellen looked at the shawl. She looked at Nora. She did not touch the shawl right away. I can rework the edge. It won't look the same. I don't want it to look the same. I want it to not come apart. All right. Ellen took the shawl and put it in her lap and sat with her hands on it for a long moment before she began. Cass watched from the doorway with a piece of harness in his hand, and he did not go into the room. That night, when the shawl was done, and Nora had gone to sleep with it around her shoulders, and Samuel had been fed and settled in the drawer of the bureau that had become his cradle, Ellen sat by the fire with her hands folded and looked at nothing. Thank you. Cass spoke from the doorway. It was only mending. No. She looked up at him. He came in and sat on the settle an arm's length from her and looked at the fire because he could not yet look at her. She hasn't given that shawl to anyone. She hasn't let me touch it in 3 years. I'm sorry. For what? I don't know. They sat that way for a while, not saying anything, and the fire ticked, and the wind came around the eaves of the house and went away again. The 7th day broke clear. Cass came in from the barn and stamped the snow off his boots and stood in the doorway a long minute before he spoke. Roads open past the creek. I could get you to Bishop's Ford in 2 days if we started tomorrow. Ellen was at the stove. She did not turn around. She said, "All right." Nora, who had been setting the table for breakfast, put down the plate she was holding very carefully, as if it had become suddenly and dangerously fragile. She did not look at either of them. She walked out of the room. Cass watched her go. She'll be all right. Ellen did not turn from the stove. I know she will. He did not say what he was thinking, which was that he did not know it, and that he had watched a child not be all right before, and that he had promised himself in the second winter after his wife that he would never again be the man who did not see a thing coming. He went out to the barn. He spent the morning oiling harness he had oiled a week before. He came in at noon and ate without tasting. Ellen packed her bag in the back room, and she packed it slowly, because there was not very much to pack, and she was making it last. That afternoon, Samuel began to cough. It was not a bad cough at first. It was the small, dry cough of a child who has been through a hard week and who is remembering it. Ellen picked him up and walked him and sang to him without words, and by supper he had quieted, and by full dark he was asleep on her shoulder with his cheek against her collarbone. By midnight, he was burning. Cass came awake to the sound of Ellen in the front room, saying the child's name over and over, low and steady, the way a person prays when they have forgotten the words. He came out in his stockings with a lamp. Samuel's face was the color of a poppy. His breath came fast and shallow, and there was a whistle in it Cass did not like. How long? An hour. Maybe less. He was cool at 10. Cass set the lamp down. He put the back of 2 fingers against the child's forehead and then against his own, and he did not need to have done it to know. Doc Halvorsen is in Redwater. That's 10 miles. In the dark. The moon's up, the road's clear past the creek. He was already reaching for his coat. Ellen stood up with the child in her arms. She crossed the room in 3 steps, and she caught the sleeve of his coat the way she had caught it in the snow 7 days ago, with a hand that would not open. Cass, he stopped. My baby will die if you leave us. He looked down at her. She was not weeping. Her face was very still and very white, and her eyes had the ice under water look they had had at the wagon, and her hand on his sleeve did not shake. I don't mean the ride. Her voice was low. I mean, if you go now, and you are 3 hours in the cold, and the fever breaks the wrong way, I will be alone in this house with him, and I cannot, Cass, I cannot do it alone. Not again. Please. He stood very still. He had been about to open the door. His hand was on the latch. The wind outside had died, and the night was the pure black cold that follows a storm, and Redwater was 10 miles, and Doc Halvorsen was a good man who had ridden out for less. Behind them, in the doorway of the small back bedroom, Nora stood in her nightgown with the mended shawl around her shoulders. She had heard. She came across the room without a sound. She walked past her father, and she stopped in front of Ellen, and she reached up with both hands, and Ellen, without thinking, without deciding, bent and let Nora take Samuel from her arms. Nora held the baby against her collarbone the way she had held him the first night. She looked up at her father. She's ours now. Papa, don't go. Cass Holloway took his hand off the latch. He took his coat off, and he hung it on the peg. He walked to the stove and he built the fire up until the iron sang, and he set a pot of water on it, and he went into the back room and pulled the mattress off the small bed and dragged it into the front room in front of the fire. "Lay him here." Nora laid the baby down on the mattress. Ellen knelt beside him. Cass brought a basin of cool water and a cloth, and he brought the tin of camphor from the shelf where his wife had kept it, and he brought the small glass bottle of honey and whiskey his mother had taught him to mix for a croup 50 years ago in a cabin in Kentucky, and he set all of these things down on the hearth in a row without saying what any of them were for. Cool cloth on his forehead. Not cold. Cool, change it every few minutes. Yes, whiskey and honey, 1 spoon, warm water to thin it. Small sips. Yes, camphor on his chest, thin, don't get it near his eyes. Yes, I'll keep the fire and the water. Yes. They worked that way for 3 hours without speaking of anything but the child. Nora sat cross-legged on the far side of the mattress and held Samuel's small hot foot in her small cold hand and did not let go of it. Ellen changed the cloth on his forehead and hummed the wordless song she had hummed at supper, and Cass fed the fire, and every so often he brought a fresh basin of water, cooler than the last but never cold, and set it at Ellen's knee. At around 3 in the morning the whistle went out of the child's breath. At around 4 the flush went out of his cheeks and the poppy color faded to a mottled pink and then to the soft ordinary pink of a sleeping child. At around 5 Ellen put her palm on Samuel's forehead and left it there for a long moment and then took it away and looked at Cass across the mattress, and her mouth trembled once and she did not cry. Cass reached across the child and put his hand over hers on the mattress where Nora could not see. He did not squeeze it. He only laid his hand there. He left it there for a long time. Samuel slept through the dawn. Ellen slept with her forehead against the edge of the mattress and one hand on his chest. Nora slept curled at his feet with the shawl over her like a small blue-flowered tent. Cass sat on the settle and watched the 3 of them and did not sleep at all. At first light, he got up quietly. He put on his coat and his hat, and he went to the barn and saddled the bay. And he rode out of the yard with the sun just clearing the ridge behind him. He rode to Redwater. Not for the doctor. The child no longer needed a doctor, and Cass Holloway had learned in 4 winters to know the difference between a fever that is broken and a fever that is only resting. He rode to Redwater because Redwater had a courthouse and a preacher and a land office, and because a man who has kept his hands to himself for 4 winters does not always know how to say a thing out loud, and sometimes the only way he knows how to say it is to ride 10 miles in the cold and put his name on a piece of paper. He was at the courthouse when it opened. He spoke to the clerk for a long time. He signed 2 documents. He paid $3 in coin from a leather purse that had not been opened since the 2nd winter. He put the papers inside his coat, and he walked across the street to the parsonage, and he knocked on the door. The Reverend Amos Whitfield had baptized Nora Holloway 6 years and 8 months ago, and had buried her mother 4 winters after. And he opened the door in his shirt sleeves and looked at Cass Holloway on his stoop in the cold morning light and did not need to be told what had brought him. "Come in, Cass. I won't sit." "All right. I need to know what a man does in a case like this." The Reverend Whitfield poured coffee that Cass did not drink, and he explained, in the plain, steady voice he had used at gravesides and christenings both, what a man did in a case like this. There were papers. There was a matter of banns which could be waived. There was a matter of the widow's consent, which was hers alone to give. There was the small question of a name for the child, if the child was to bear it, which was also hers. I'm not asking her today. No. I'm asking her when she's ready to be asked. That's the right way. I only wanted to know how it was done. So, I would not do it wrong. The Reverend Whitfield looked at Cass Holloway for a long moment across the small kitchen table where he had sat with him the morning after his wife died, and had said almost nothing then, either. Cass, yes, you will not do it wrong. Cass rode home in the middle of the day with the papers inside his coat and the sun on the snow so bright it hurt to look at. When he came up the last rise before the ranch, he saw smoke going straight up from the chimney into the clean, cold air. And he saw Nora on the porch in her mother's shawl with Samuel in her arms, and he saw Ellen at the barn door with a bucket in her hand, having gone out to feed the chickens because he had not been there to do it. Ellen saw him coming. She set the bucket down. She did not wave. He rode into the yard and he swung down and he stood a moment with his hand on the bay's neck. He slept? He slept. He nursed at 9. The fever hasn't come back. Good, where did you go? He looked at her. He did not answer at once. He was a man who had learned in 4 winters to say only what a moment required and no more, and he did not yet know what this moment required. Town, he waited a moment. There was a thing I needed to know. All right. She did not ask what thing. She picked up the bucket and she went into the barn, and he stood in the yard a moment longer, watching the door she had gone through. And then he took the bay to the trough, and he did not take the papers out of his coat. He did not take them out that night either, or the night after. He kept them inside his coat, folded small against his ribs, where he could feel them when he breathed. He would know when to take them out. He had learned that too. The winter went on the way winters do. The road to Bishop's Ford opened again in the 3rd week of January, and the 2nd week of February, and the 1st week of March, and Ellen Reed did not take it. She did not speak of taking it. Her brother in Bishop's Ford wrote once more, a shorter letter than the first, with more qualifications, and Ellen read it once and put it in the stove without a word. Samuel grew. He learned to sit up on the rug by the fire in the 2nd week of February, and he learned to say a sound that was almost Nora in the last week of March. And Nora, who had lived 6 years without a small thing to be responsible for, and who had accordingly been responsible for very large ones, carried him about the house on her hip with the settled air of a woman running a small, competent farm. Ellen mended everything in the house that could be mended. Then she started on the barn. Cass, in the 4th week of March, took the papers out of his coat. He did not take them out with any ceremony. He was sitting at the kitchen table one evening after supper, and Ellen was across from him darning the heel of a sock, and Nora was asleep on the settle with Samuel curled against her side and the mended shawl over them both, and the fire was low, and outside the first thaw was running off the eaves in a slow, steady tick. Cass took the folded papers out of his coat pocket. He laid them on the table between them, unopened. Ellen looked at the papers. She looked at Cass. She did not touch the papers. What are those? They're what a man brings when he means to stay. She was very still. I rode to Redwater the morning after the fever. I filed a paper putting your name on the deed of this place beside mine. It's a joint holding now, whether you sign the other paper or not. That one is yours to keep even if you decide to go. Cass, the other one is a marriage license. It's got my name on it. It doesn't have yours. I didn't want to sign your name for you. I wanted you to sign it when you were ready to sign it. If you're never ready, that's the way of it, and the first paper stands. She reached out. Very slowly, she touched the edge of the folded papers with 2 fingers. When did you decide? He thought about it a long time, because he was a man who had learned to say only what a moment required, and this moment required him to say something true. When you took the shawl. He looked at his hands on the table. When she gave you the shawl and you sat with your hands on it before you started, because you knew what it was. That's when. That was in December. Yes, you waited 3 months. You had a hard year. I wasn't going to hurry you through the end of it. Ellen Reed put her hand over the folded papers and did not lift it. She looked across the table at the man who had ridden 3 miles into a blizzard with her and her son inside his coat, and who had knelt on the far side of a mattress at 4 in the morning and put his hand over hers and left it there, and who had ridden to Redwater in the cold to put a woman's name on a deed and had then said nothing about it for 3 months, and she began, quietly, without any sound at all, the way she had wept on the first night, to smile. Cass Holloway. She shook her head, still smiling. You are a great deal of trouble. I know. I'll sign it in the morning. All right, not tonight, in the morning, so that Nora can see. All right. They sat with the papers between them and did not speak for a long time. The fire settled. Nora, in her sleep, tightened her small hand on the corner of the shawl. Samuel breathed the round, easy breath of a well child. Outside the eaves ticked, and the last of the winter went slowly and grudgingly off the roof. In the morning, before breakfast, with Nora standing on a chair to see over the table and Samuel on Ellen's hip with one small fist in her hair, Ellen Reed took Cass Holloway's pen and signed her name on the second paper in a clean, careful hand. Nora watched her write it. When she was done, Nora climbed down off the chair and walked around the table and stood between them. And she put one hand on her father's knee and one hand on Ellen's, and she looked at Samuel on Ellen's hip, and she said the thing she had said in the front room at 4 in the morning by the light of the fire, and she said it the same way, because it had been true then and it was true now. She's ours. Cass Holloway put his hand over his daughter's hand on his knee, and he looked across the table at his wife, and he did not answer, because a man does not need to answer a thing that has already been settled. Outside, in the yard, the sun came up over the ridge and struck the snow, and the snow that had covered them for a hard winter began, at last, to go.